In a city where the walls of buildings seemed to whisper stories of discrimination and division, there was a small street in the heart of the neighborhood where racial tensions were as palpable as the air itself. It was a place where smiles were often frozen and glances shifted, a street that housed lives marked by years of silent struggles against an unjust system. Here, residents were well aware of the behavior of certain police officers, and among them, there was one in particular who made the community tremble. Lieutenant Lemoyne, a man in his 50s, whose authority seemed as rigid as his attitude towards people he considered suspicious. The community, especially black people, had little respect for him. His brutal methods were legendary, his arrests were often arbitrary, and his judgments were lightning fast, especially when it came to black citizens. Rumor had it that he saw potential criminals in every black face. The locals spoke of him in hushed tones, often moving away from his gaze when they passed him in the street, as if the mere presence of this man in uniform reminded them that in this city, anything could turn against them at any moment, even for no reason. That day, Amara, a black woman in her 30s, took her time getting to work, as she did every morning. She was an assistant in an architectural firm, a profession that she had won hard, with patience and determination. She had come to this city seeking a fresh start after leaving her hometown, a place where racial wounds ran deep and the past followed her like a shadow. She had come here to be seen differently, to have her work speak for her, to prove that, despite prejudices, she could be seen as more than just a stereotype. Her path was still strewn with obstacles, but she had done her best to navigate with calm and dignity. That morning, however, she would find herself at the center of a public humiliation, one more ordeal in the long list of those who suffer injustice without being able to fight it. Amara walked leisurely, her purse clutched to her side, thinking about her work for the day. She thought about the architect she worked for, a man she greatly respected, and the meeting that awaited them. An important event for the project on which she had put so much energy. She was focused, but like every morning, she couldn't help but glance at the window of a small clothing store.
Inside, mannequins in elegant dresses and precious fabrics shimmered under the lights.
It was a vision that fascinated her, which took her away for a moment from her daily concerns. She stopped for a moment to admire the dresses, dreaming that one day, perhaps, she could treat herself to one of these creations. Just then, rushing footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. A burst of heels hitting the pavement, followed by a firm, authoritative voice. She turned slowly, her gaze falling on the man in uniform who approached her. It was him, Lieutenant Lemoyne, the same man whose ruthless actions had become infamous in the neighborhood. He looked down at her with a piercing, judgmental gaze, as if he had already made a decision without even knowing it. "Excuse me, miss," he said hoarsely, without preamble. "You stole a handbag from the store next door." Amara froze, her hands instinctively tightening around her own bag in a defensive gesture. "Want?" She glanced at her bag, wondering if she had heard correctly. There was nothing suspicious. Nothing. She hadn't stolen anything. "Excuse me. I was just passing by. I didn't steal anything." His voice was calm, but firm. She wasn't going to let herself get sucked into this madness. The lieutenant fixed her with an icy gaze, his expression implacable. A black woman. She had to be guilty of something, he probably thought. He took a step forward, standing in front of her, his imposing figure obscuring the entrance to the store. "I'm telling you, you stole this bag.
Open it now."
His words were a command, not a request. Amara hesitated for a split second, her heart beating a little faster. But she knew what he expected of her, to obey.
Not a word, not a resistance.
Obey. This is what was expected of all the people he deemed guilty before even verifying the facts. "I'm telling you, this bag is mine," she insisted calmly, but her blood was starting to boil. How could he treat her like this, without proof, without reason? She had never been a conflicted woman, but here she felt a surge of anger rising, legitimate anger. Lemoyne, however, was not interested in the words of a suspected person. He was far too sure of himself to see beyond his prejudices. With a sharp gesture, he ordered her to lie down on the ground to search her belongings. A degrading gesture, a demand that no respected citizen should ever receive. Passers-by, who had begun to stop around them, observed the scene without intervening. Some whispered among themselves, feeling helpless, while others deliberately avoided meeting Amara's gaze, as if distance could protect them from the same humiliation.
I have nothing to hide from you.
But the situation was about to take an even more unexpected turn. As Lemoyne was about to force Amara to kneel on the pavement, the sounds of hurried footsteps in the street grew closer, but it was the vibration of his phone that caught his attention. With a sudden gesture, he took it out of his pocket, ignoring the young woman before his eyes, to pick up the call without even bothering to apologize. The sergeant's voice on the other end of the line broke the tension that had settled in the air. Lemoyne, your car was stolen. Surveillance cameras show that you left the keys in it. He didn't have time to react, a shiver of panic coursing through his body. His lips barely trembled at the irony of the situation. He had become so convinced of his own authority that he had neglected the most basic caution, leaving the keys to his vehicle on the seat, open and accessible. In an instant, all the pride and confidence he exuded melted like snow in the sun. He turned his head sharply towards Amara, but his gaze, full of guilt and confusion, betrayed his total dismay. He was trapped. What do you have to say to defend yourself now? Amara said this sentence in a calm, cold tone, with a hint of barely concealed satisfaction. A slight smile, barely perceptible, stretched his lips. She knew, deep down, that karma had just struck, and she wasn't going to let it get away with it that easily. Lemoyne, trapped in his own arrogance, looked around, desperately searching for an escape. But the looks of passers-by were now full of disdain. The scene he had just caused had become much more than Amara's humiliation. It was now his own, which took place in front of a silent but complicit audience. The murmurs in the crowd increased in volume, transforming the situation into a public confrontation that spared no one. The sergeant on the other end of the line continued to describe the situation with unsettling precision. The man who stole Lemoyne's car was a young man from the neighborhood, quick and discreet. In an instant, he had seen the keys left on the seat and acted without the slightest hesitation. Far from being a particularly cunning thief, the latter had simply relied on the imprudence of the lieutenant, who believed that he had everything under control. Residents who witnessed the incident observed the scene with a new perspective. Amara was no longer the suspect. She was now the victim of a broken justice system, of an abuse of power which, for once, turned against its author. While Lemoyne, besieged by shame, no longer knew where to stand, Amara stood proudly, full of dignity. The policeman, now almost broken, tried to regain an ounce of control. He turned to Amara, searching for words to justify his behavior, but nothing could repair the humiliation. He muttered, "Miss I." But before he could say anything more, Amara interrupted, her strong, confident tone ringing through the air. "No, Lieutenant. You publicly humiliated me, but now it's time for you to take responsibility for what you've done." She paused, her eyes fixing on him with a new intensity. Maybe this car theft is a signal, a little reminder of what it costs to not see the truth, to be blind to humanity. A wave of discreet laughter ran through the crowd, but it was not mocking laughter. It was a kind of collective relief, an outlet for years of silent injustice. Lemoyne, now in complete disarray, could no longer hide his uneasiness. In the following hours, the consequences for Lemoyne were devastating. An official report was filed against him, and the incident soon made local headlines, becoming an example of the arrogance and racism that sometimes plagues law enforcement. The police were forced to open an internal investigation into his behavior, and the authorities, caught in an embarrassing dilemma, had to answer questions from a community that would no longer allow itself to be pushed around. Amara, for her part, emerged from this ordeal with more dignity than ever. Although deeply shaken, she had shown great self-control, turning the initial humiliation into a silent victory. Lieutenant Lemoyne had lost his authority in an instant. He could no longer present himself as a defender of the law. He was now the one who had abused his power to crush an innocent woman. He had stolen Amara's dignity, and in a brutal karmic act, he had just lost hers. Lemoyne's return to his post took place in an atmosphere of general distrust. Neighborhood residents, although they had seen police officers display prejudice on numerous occasions, had had a rare glimpse of the downfall of a man who believed he was untouchable. For Amara, this moment became a symbol of resistance. She would never be the same again. She was no longer a simple assistant in an architect's office, but a silent but powerful voice that would remind the city, and Lieutenant Lemoyne, that unjust power could not always triumph.